Hey everyone, Steve here. Before we get to the podcast that I know you guys want to listen to, I've got some exciting news. My new book, Peak Performance, is out June 6th. And in celebration of that, we're going to run some really cool pre-order bonus prizes. So if you order the book before June 6th, you can get things like autographed Neely Spence Gracie or Natasha Rogers pictures, a drum kit signed by Matt Billingsley, who is the drummer for Taylor Swift, Dave Epstein autograph book of the Sports Gene, Ryan Holiday autograph book, Alex Hutchinson autograph book, Alexi Pop has signed a poster of her movie Tracktown for us. So that and a whole bunch of other things that I'm giving away for free if you just buy the book, like training programs of some of my elite athletes, my cheat sheet guide to coaching, and a bunch of insider coaching stuff. So head on over to scienceofrunning.com. That should be up or will be up very shortly. And please consider pre-ordering, buying this book. The book allows me to do projects like this podcast here and articles on the blog that you hopefully frequent for free. So without that income and that availability, I wouldn't be able to put out all this information. Plus, I spent over 2 years working with my co-author, Brad Stolberg, scouring articles, books, talking to over 50 world-class performers, and I really think the result and the information is worthwhile. So do me a favor, head over to scienceofrunning.com, check out those pre-orders, and please consider buying some books. All right, without further ado, on to the podcast. Thanks a lot, guys.
Welcome back to another episode of On Coaching with Magness and Marcus. I'm Steve Magness, the coach at the University of Houston and author of the new book, Peak Performance. Check it out. It is sponsoring our podcast, apparently. And I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, John Marcus, coach of High Performance West. John, we're back at it.
Back to give the people what they want. You know it's track season, folks, because the pods become a little less frequent, but that's okay because Steve and I have skin in the game. We're at meets, we're at the practice track, and mostly we're traveling, but wouldn't trade this season for anything.
That's right. The travel of the track coach, something that no one ever explains. This is actually being done in between my own working of the hammer throw at a home meet. So, life of a track coach, you do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of that life, today's topic, experience versus PowerPoints. Now, what do we mean by that, John?
Okay, I'm getting up on my, high horse.
Do it.
IBC, here's my quick rant. It's like, it's exciting to go to coaching conferences and connect with peers and colleagues and people in the field. And it's exciting to sit in a room and, be talked at with all this new and exciting information. And it's exciting, and Steve is definitely one who's a proponent of this, to post this new awesome study that shows XYZ stimulus creates XYZ response from some scientific article. However, that is not the thing. The thing is being out on the track, coaching, problem solving in real time, and getting that experience and that body of work to know when to employ and not to employ certain techniques. And that's really the difficulty of it, right? It's like the best writers write a lot less words, but they have more potency because they have sanded away 99 of the other words they could have used to create that sentence or that point. And so sometimes we get excited, but then you have this abundance of PowerPoints and abundance of studies. And you're like, oh, how do I apply these models? How do I apply? And the question is like, well, what are you trying to do? What are you keeping score of? Are you keeping a score of how much knowledge you are collecting? Or are you keeping a score of, are you getting your athletes competitively ready for the races or the competitions that matter most?
Yeah, to me, it all comes down to applicability. Whenever everyone knows, like, I'm a science nerd, I'm a research nerd, like, I love looking at stuff and seeing, all right, look at this new shiny object or that new shiny study. But I always come back down to the one question, and that's what is the impact to me and my athletes on the track? Like, how does this make us get better? And I think, from a coaching standpoint, it's really easy to just get excited about things and be like, oh my gosh, this is the next thing. Or like, this is the key that I learned at this conference. And then, to go home with it and not do anything with it or not be able to use it. And it just becomes this like cool, interesting factoid, this cool, interesting tidbit without, putting it to work. And when I see this kind of experience versus PowerPoint style of coaching, and the point is when I look back at my own coaching development, and when I started getting into coaching and going on presentations and giving presentations, and it always came across as, oh my gosh, like in this hour-long presentation, this guy has it figured out, and these are the answers, and this is the program I need to do. And then you go back home and you start applying it, and you're like, well, A didn't equal B, or B plus C didn't equal D. Like, what's the deal? Why didn't this work? And I think that's where that almost false reality that we're given that, hey, just follow this program, just do what I do. We have to almost unravel that as coaches as we get in with skin in the game, start coaching, and realize the complexity of what we're doing.
The problem is models are static. It's done under a certain set of conditions, whether it's study that's been repeated time and time again, but still a relatively small sample set, right? And I don't care if you're doing a study of 10,000 people. That's a really small sample set in the ethos of time. Like, over the course of the hundreds of years that we have been evolving and running and sprinting and jumping and throwing and the decades and decades and decades we've been doing it for competition and athletic purposes, still a very small sample set. So to me, it's like the most critical thing is knowing that while the models are static, the reality is coaching is very dynamic. The athletes you're working with are very dynamic. Things fluctuate and change all the time. And, yes, it's good to have an ideal in place, kind of like, a platonic ideal about this clear vision about what you can do and help craft and that place you can get that athlete to. But that's the key difference. The place you can get that athlete to. Not all 800-meter runners should train like this. All 1,500-meter runners should train like this. These are the things that make a 1,500-meter person. And any person, we can just fit you in, and you're going to be a 1,500-meter star if you do this program. And, that to me is snake oil, without a doubt. And it's tough because anytime you go to the conference, the whole idea is to spark thought. It's to spark like, okay, they, presented on this, they had this finding, and 9 times out of 10, I completely disagree with what I was just presented. 9 times out of 10, I'm like, I don't think this is right. And I don't think this is correct, but I'm willing to have an open mind and digest it and process it before I make that judgment on it. Because, at the end of the day, the whole point about experience is as we said many times before on this podcast, is you know more what not to do than what you do know to do. And by knowing more what not to do, you arrive at the correct thing to do quicker. And that's really the job of the coach, in my opinion, is to be kind of that puzzle master who can help guide an athlete and say, well, it could be all these things, but have we explored this? Or this might be the best way to attack this or improve this based on how I know you and what we've done and where we're coming from. And, I think Steve can kind of speak to this, and I've spoken to this many times. Like, he just had Natasha Rogers, run an incredible race at the women's or USATF Women's Half Marathon Championship. And I was there in person. I watched it. It was like very compelling. And I mean, this had been on a result and a race that had come on the backs of, I know, many a long heart to hearts, many a workout. Steve had been telling me for months that Natasha was mega fit, for months before this happened. And I was like, okay. And I'm like, well, it's not happening on race day, dude. What's going on? And it's like, oh yeah, and then finally it clicked. And I let you talk a little bit more about that, because that is, to me, the actualization of the dynamic coaching and having skin in the game, versus just saying, oh, well, she's done these workouts, she's going to be just ready to go when she shows up on race day.
Yeah, it's called reality, right?
Yeah, it's hard.
It's reality, and I think that a lot of times, like, when we get into coaching, we live in like this idealized dream world, like, oh no, that's not going to happen to me. I'm going to figure out, and I'm going to make sure my athletes are always ready to go. And as you start to coach, you get into reality, and you realize getting people fit is the easy part. Okay. Getting them to run fast on a specific race day in whatever conditions are prevalent is the difficult part. And I think that example is a wonderful one, because I have been telling you for months, I'm like, Natasha's fit, like she's killing workout. She's doing things that she hasn't done before, and she feels good doing it. So I know she's going to race well. But she barely made the World Cross team, had a good solid race at World Cross, has had some other races not so good, a 920 something 3K indoors along the way. And she's maybe gained a little fitness from there, but it's not crazy gains. I mean, she's still the same runner. And I think the difference here is that, after, as I told you last week, after that 920 something indoors 3K and then barely making the World Cross team, we just kind of had a, on the phone conversation where it's just, laying out the pieces and saying, all right, like, you're fit, you're getting super fit, like, things are in place, like, what's the deal? And essentially giving ourselves no excuses to risk it and to go for it and see what's there. And on some occasions, it hasn't been there. And on those occasions, like, she ran solidly, but no one else in the world paid attention. And then on the day when, she saw what was there and got to show and exploit and use her fitness, like, everyone's like, oh my gosh, she ran amazing, she did great. And she did. It was a fantastic race for her, and guts for putting it out there. But what people fail to realize are the numerous times where she's gone for it and then blown up and had to pick herself off the ground and say, all right, next time we're going to get after it and do the same thing, and it's going to be there at some time. And I think that is a perfect illustration of the reality of fitness is we have this misconception that if we do A, B, and C workout, if we follow those PowerPoint slides that we all put up of progressions of workouts, if we can nail those things, and come race day, like, we're going to be good. But the body is a very fickle thing.
Well, it's the body-mind connection, right? Yeah. We, again, I've said this many times, we traffic in the metabolism and energy system. We traffic in the body a lot. And because we have this feeling as coaches that we can control this. I have a prescription of reps and sets and, volume and all this stuff. And I can control as a coach and manipulate and, create this stimulus, and voila, you're going to be fit. But the thing is we've come to a culture where fit and being fit creates this air of entitlement, as in, oh, you should just be able to replicate it any day, no matter what, or you should be able to directly transfer this because you've been doing this in practice, and the mind and body connection, that inner game, is the key to consistent repeatability to express your fitness, regardless the circumstances of the race. And you see how many times people run really well in a time trial scenario, only to not be as effective or even in the conversation of competitive in a championship scenario. And I'm still a purist. I'm still naive. I still believe in competition. I think competition is the ultimate crucible. And I'm always a fan of race, because as long as the athlete is excited and there's a spark of joy to race for them, then there's something to learn from it. On the tail end of that, Tara Welling, who had won that race last year and set that course record, and Tasha was within a whisper of. This year coming in, not quite as fit. She had 2 weeks off or 2 months off from injury, stress fracture in her pelvis. And it was like, well, do you even want to race? You're not 100%. And she's like, yeah, there's still a lot to learn. And if I go out, I have a better idea where my fitness is. I'm like, it's worth the effort. And so a lot of people would say, oh, well, she finished 8th. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Actually, it was a great race. It was awesome. She was very positive. Typically what happens when she gets in a point where she's not competitive, she starts to mentally check out, have a lot of negative self-talk. But she was able to stay very focused and process-oriented, be a lot of positive self-talk. She was in no woman's land for a long time. She just ran out of fitness because she went out in like 5:08 for the first mile, which she doesn't have the fitness to do right now. And so she experienced, high degree of acidosis and, lactic burn at the end there. And it just was not a place she's been recently in her training. But throughout it, she left with a very positive vibe. And that to me warmed my heart and said, okay, we're on the right path. Now, the continuation to race is exactly this. Go out, try a different strategy, see where you're at. And if you fail, you extract as much learnings as you can from that failure. And that to me is what warms my heart as a true champion. Someone who can win them and someone who can lose them, like a Ron Clark, so to speak. He would go out, set a world record on a Saturday, and then the following Wednesday, run a club race and lose to 5 guys in the 800, but he loved competition. And that to me is sometimes where we as coaches and sports scientists and, very intelligent people, very clever people miss the boat, when it's all about, saying you're just good to go because you've done the physical work, but you haven't sat down and addressed the hard emotional labor to get your people ready to that next level. That's where the disconnect happens. And it's tough because we don't have neat models. You can't put emotional readiness in an Excel sheet. You can't track it. You can't say, hey, we're going to track today and see where your emotional readiness is at. Okay, let's go. It's not going to happen. But that's where the art and the relationship side is very critical.
Yeah.
And I mean, Steve, you can talk to this too, as well. And before I let Steve jump in, I've gone back at an athlete's suggestion and started to reread The Inner Game of Tennis, which I read like 10 years ago, so it was long overdue. And I mean, it's a very small book, 130 pages, but very, very deep and very dense with a lot of this type of wisdom where it's less about the judgment of right or wrong, less about here's the model, you need to adhere to this model or else you're bad and you're not good, and more about letting the ego go, noticing, and allowing people to become their best selves and who they're meant to be, rather than trying to mold them into some artificial model they could never aspire to, really. And it's been, I read it one night. It was just like, oh yeah, this is a great book. I forgot it's in my top 10 because it's been 8 years. So I really suggest everyone who is listening, just go pick it up. There's so many copies out there, 130 pages, and each one is worth its weight in gold and then some.
Yeah, that's a classic. I read that as, I think, a college freshman. And back then I wasn't reading much, so that shows you how good it was.
Oh, it's worth a reread every year. It's put it into one of my reread this every year, shelves on my library.
Yep. I'm with you 100%. But I think, there's a lot of lessons in that book and a lot of lessons there that you said, especially on judgment. And I think that what happens is that fake reality, or that fake reality that we create as coaches, or that fake certainty that our training is going to lead to, some certain outcome, harms athletes too, because it creates this perception that, oh, okay, like if I do this training, then I'm going to get this result. And when the athlete doesn't get that exact result, it causes them to freak out, panic, or start doubting themselves. Now, I'm sure as a fellow college and former college coach, you can have as many stories as I have when you have athletes race that first race and they go, Coach, what happened? Like, I ran 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds off my PR. Like, I thought I felt good. I thought I was ready to go. But obviously I'm not. And it's like, dude, it's January 1st.
Well, and it's not the thing.
Yeah.
It's not the thing. The thing is, okay, I'm gonna get on my high horse again and rant. The thing is not show up every time and run fast. Like, this is why I say I believe in the spirit of competition. The thing is beat people. Show up and beat people. Not beat the clock. Not, oh, hey, I got a PR, but I got 12th place. It's like, so, like, go back to the lab, go back to the workshop, go back to the track. Make better art, work at making better art, and show up and beat people. And if you beat people, people will take notice. Best example I can give is Woody Kincaid. Woody Kincaid, helped recruit that kid when I was an assistant coach at University of Portland 5-6 years ago. He was just a competitive snot. This kid has not won any NCAA championships. Is not, he's had 1 or 2 All-Americans. Not really that impressive, but the kid just knows how to beat people, and he doesn't care. And he's, it's been marvelous to watch him blossom under Rob Collins's tutelage, and even with Jerry Schumacher now. But the kid has a contract from Nike. He shouldn't. He shouldn't have a contract at all, but he does because at the right place at the right time, he showed up and said, "I'm going to just beat people," and that's what it's about. And I champion, Jerry for having his wits to, recruit and get that guy on the team for Bowerman, because it's a diamond in the rough. And I was telling people years before, like, watch out for this guy. He's a competitive snot. He's going to do something at some time and it'll be out of nowhere because that's just what he's about. He doesn't care. He just shows up. Oh, I'm in the race. Well, I'm in the race, so I might as well just beat as many people as I can and try to win. It's very simple. It's not about time. So, okay. And rant.
All right, soapbox done. But, that's a great point because, if you were to ask any good college coach at recruiting, the thing that we look at when I go to high school races or I go to, go watch the state meet is how people compete. If they have that inner competitiveness, then that's great. They're going to do well. Like we can get anybody fit, but it's really hard to train that just like instinct to win or that instinct to compete as best as you can and put yourself in position to run well. That is very hard to get out of. And it's sad for me. I'll go on a tangent. It's sad for me now to see a lot of these high school races that are set up. I'm not opposed to high school kids running fast. I tried to do it when I was there in high school, so I can't. But it's almost like high school races in a lot of cases have been set up time trials, just like their college brethren and just like their professional brethren. And while the fast times are nice to see, I think we're missing out on creating those stories and those storylines of people competing. And I think developing those skills, those racing skills, is a step that every runner has to take.
Okay, time out, Jeans, real quick. How many sub 4 minute milers, high school sub 4 minute milers, have won an NCAA championship outdoors? Like, not Alan Webb.
No.
Not Matthew Maton, not Lucas Verbekis, it's like, time out. So this is another one of my pet peeves too, is exactly this over optimization of high school racing for that fast mark. Who is that kid from Idaho, who ran sub 4 last year at a meet here in Oregon, went to Penn State and is no longer in the NCAA system, right?
Legowski, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And no hate at all.
Yep.
No hate at all. Like, it's exciting that high school kids are running this fast. Yes. But so we're optimizing and over optimizing them in high school. And I, give hats off to like Elise Cranny and, Ella Donahue and Christina Agregon and all those people who went to college, because college is very important because there's ups and downs. Because there's ups and downs. High school, the crucible of high school, it's like, well, you're the best out of a million of these, young men and women who are doing the sport right now. But also too, what's the long tail? And I very rarely have seen that translation happen in American middle distance running, where they were rock stars in high school and they translated to being rock stars in college and or as pros. One of the few is like Ajay Wilson. Allen, after he kind of went through some ups and downs and left college, yes, he translated for a little while as well. And I mean, German Fernandez, that's a heartbreak right there. One of the most uberly talented people in middle distance in the last decade, or 20 years to come out of American high school distance running. Never won an NCAA title. I mean, American USA title, never made an Olympic team, even though he was an NCAA champion his freshman year in the 15. Like, it's a very difficult thing to do. And often the, comfort of models, the comfort of PowerPoints, the comfort of that static education is we want to believe this predictability. If they've done this much work at this speed and these many reps and this much volume for XYZ long a time, if it fits my periodization chart, and even though your periodization chart may be found on the best physiological principles, it's a mix of like Bosch and Bondarchuk and, the tiered system and this and that in the weight room. And then you got some Lydiard and Daniels and Bowerman things all kind of mixed in there. And, I took some from Magness's book and it's great. I'm stroking every system. If every box is checked, still you can't predict. And that's the most frustrating thing in the world as a coach. Because I tell you what, I have had my share of, everything's going really well with this athlete. They're really excited. They're really engaged. They're competitively, ripe. And then they just, lay an egg. And then I've also had the exact inverse happen as well.
But that's reality.
Yeah.
and I think that shows that, like, you have natural athletes, right? And you are a natural coach. And, like, that's why when everyone freaks out about, like, oh, like, how fast are we going to run in the marathon and this, especially in the marathon, it's like, God knows you can't predict that stuff. I've had people with phenomenal buildups and then just blow up and bomb.
Like Sarah Hall, like
exactly.
The 2 marathons she ran like a year or two ago.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was phenomenal buildup. I was like,
I know, you're like, oh, she's going to run really well. She's going to get it. And then it's like, egg laid.
Yeah, and she's one of the toughest racers I know. So that's what happens. That's the real world. That's planning everything to the T that you can, and it just happens. That's shows the complexity of the human being from a physical, emotional, psychological standpoint.
Well, often we underaddress our coping mechanisms. Like, how do people cope when things aren't going well, the chips are down? That is, to me, is something that should be trained. Like, what's the coping ability? And the coping ability is soft. If it's, if it cracks lightly, you're in trouble.
Exactly. And I think that's something that, we've started to emphasize a lot as a program is where your mind goes in a race is where you should train it to go in practice, right? And you should develop those coping abilities under stressful situations and, like, repeatedly ingrain them so that you have somewhere to go and gain the flexibility to have several different coping mechanisms to get you through tough times. Because I think the other misnomer is that, like, people see these, like, elite athletes, like, whoever, Kipchoge in the marathon, and they think, oh, they're superhuman. They can just do anything. And the reality is, those same, like, negative thoughts, that same pain, it goes through their head just as it would you or me. And they have to figure out ways to cope with it. And sometimes I think what happens, going back to the high school stars and translating, is that, and I can tell you this from my experience, is like, I had a really good coping strategy for, like, me going out hammering, dealing with the internal pain, because that's all I did. I didn't use rabbits or anything like these guys now. I remember at the district meet running 4:01, just leading the whole way. But I had great coping strategies for that. What I didn't have great coping strategies for is going out and doing that and having someone pass me, at 1,200 meters, and then developing a strategy how to react and like keep my mind settled and keep doing my thing. And I think that flexibility is lost, especially when you make the jump too early, because the way you develop those coping strategies is by putting yourself in a myriad of different situations that some go well, some fail, and, like, seeing what works and seeing what doesn't and learning from it. But if you're only stuck in a situation where I'm the best or I'm dominating this or I'm in the front pack, or when you get to the pros, I'm in a time trial race and sitting and hanging on, then you don't develop that myriad of strategies to help get you through any situation.
Expectation is the killer of joy. And what happens with, when you do something phenomenal at a young age, then there's this expectation that you should know how to repeat it as you did. Like Steve runs 401. Steve, you should run at least at worst 401 now forever. And it's like, no, that's not the case at all. And what happens is, judgment sadly ends up being an interference. And when judgment's an interference, it takes away all the spark of enthusiasm and excitement that you had for just showing up and experiencing what is, and a lot of my guidance now with athletes is not about, oh, I'm going to go win this race, coach, or, oh, I'm going to run this pace and try to run a PR. And, oh, I'm trying to, XYZ beat this person. It's like, hey, just show up, experience what you can experience on the day without judgment, notice it, but don't put a good or bad on it. And the tough part is, right, we live in this perfectionist culture where you have to have the whole plan laid out, 5-year plan, 10-year plan. You have to have, PowerPoint, slides up the yin yang for every little thing. And you have to have the training in an Excel sheet and, for the whole year, just here's how it's going to go. And you're making these bold predictions. But last time I checked, even the best predictive experts with the most, with the sharpest tools, meteorologists, they get it wrong most of the time. So what makes us think that without the sharpest, $1 billion in tools at our disposal, like most meteorologists have, that we can get it right with such a complex, infrastructure and system of the human body?
Well, it's scientific in hubris and a little bit in arrogance. It's this belief that, if we're advanced enough now and we have the knowledge base and the measurement toolkit to be able to predict these things, and no matter how many times it comes wrong or proves wrong, we don't learn from it and we don't learn the humility to use it. I mean, you go back every decade and there's some prediction made that oh, this is going to change the world or this is going to save everything. Even if you go back human genome genetics, oh, we'll do this and then we'll have it figured out. And then we do that and it's oh shit, it's really complex. And the same thing is happening now with brain stuff, right? Oh yeah. We'll measure, we have fMRI, we can measure all this blood flow in our brain. We're going to figure it out. Oh shit, it's super complex, more so than we thought. Well, the same thing happens in racing, right? It's oh, we can measure VO2 max and running economy and lactate threshold, and I can predict your performance. And it's no, you give me all that data and you can predict whether someone who is an elite runner is better than someone who is an average runner. Great. Congratulations. But if I line up 30 elite runners and you have all that data in front of you and that's it, you can't pick the winner. You can't pick who will finish in the top 5. It doesn't work. So, and I think that shows at every level is that everything is always a little more complex than we think it is.
Oh, and that's the value of running the race. The form charts rarely go to form. And
exactly.
That's what I love about championship time of year. It's there's all these form charts. People have gone to such lengths to predict the outcome. And, when they're right, they're oh, I told you so. And then when they're wrong, oh, well, it's just an educated guess. It's there's no penalty. There's only reward. But the most exciting thing is when the form charts are completely off and, a dark horse, quote unquote, comes out of nowhere. But that person wasn't a dark horse in their mind. The gal who, won the NCAA indoor mile this year from Sanford. She wasn't a dark horse in her mind. In her mind, she was yes, it's very clear. I want to be a professional runner. I want to compete at a high level. And to do that, the first step is winning an NCAA title. So I'm going to give myself permission to go and train and win an NCAA title, even though no one else thinks I have a shot. Boom, she did it. And that's beautiful. And hope she keeps that mentality, and I hope she keeps that openness. Because again, we live in this perfectionist society, and most people are uncomfortable without a standard for right or wrong. And that's what the judgmental mind does, is we create these artificial, well, this is the proper way to do it, this is the non-proper way to do it. If I would have told you the best way to win an Olympic steeplechase is to train for 6 weeks before the Olympic steeplechase and train 3 times a day, and your first run is a longer run, 8 to 10 miles, your second run's a 5-mile tempo run, and your third run is a hard track session where you're just sprinting over hurdles set 30 meters apart from each other, 3 hurdles set 30 meters apart from each other, down to a straightaway. And you just do that as many times until you're exhausted. You'd be like, and then after that, you have a nice scotch and a cigar that night. You're like, there's no way. Reality is, the only American to ever win a gold medal in the steeplechase, that was his training. What's his name? Horace Ashenfeld. Yes. So he was an FBI agent, couldn't train during the day, and he was a family man. So during when he was working, he would go at 10 o'clock at night to the track at 10 p.m. in the dark. So every wannabe elite, wannabe pro runner who's like, oh, I have to work a part-time job at a shoe store, I can't take naps. Listen up. 10 p.m. he would go and run at the track after work, after putting his kids to bed, after dinner, and then he'd get 6 weeks off before the Olympics, and from the FBI, and say, hey, go train for the Olympics for 6 weeks. That was his training. 3 runs a day, easy, medium, hard, in that order for 6 weeks, finishing off a cigar and a scotch. What'd he do? He won a gold medal and set the world record in the steeplechase. So when you read things like that, right, to me, I'm not trying to laugh in the face of everyone, but what I'm trying to say is, or say, oh, you guys are all wrong with all this science and, taking it all so seriously. But what we have now, this density of knowledge and this density of measurements, which are very valuable, but we need to know how to use them. And we also need to be open to the ability to say, hey, that measure might not have as much weight as we're investing in it right now. And that's okay, but it's still something to consider. Because there have been paths laid before us by pioneers that were maybe a lot more rigorous, maybe a lot more difficult, that have proved to be successful for them. Now, I don't know if that's the right thing to replicate. I don't think Evan Jager is going to start replicating that model anytime soon, but you never know. I could definitely see like Kim Boy doing that for sure.
For sure.
And then doing a little dance, but that's the fun of it, right? That's the excitement of it. And what crushes my enthusiasm for the sport sometimes is hearing coaches talk about their proven, flawless, 100% guaranteed training methodology and model, and I can plug anyone into this, and I'm going to make them into, someone who's going to run this fast or win this race or this championship. And to me, that's where you kill the exploratory effort of what we're doing, because every year is different.
Well, it's also, it's interesting. The timing of this a little bit is in Kipchoge, Desisa, and Tadesse, the 3 athletes in that sub-2 marathon project. Anyways,
it hasn't happened yet. We're recording this before this happens.
Yes, very true. But the point isn't to talk about that. But the point is, all these scientists and researchers tracked all their training, right? And beforehand, some of the journalists asked, what surprised you? And they were like, how slow they ran on their normal days. They were just shocked. And here you have like 3 of the best guys in the world, arguably the best marathoner, perhaps in history. And, all these guys are shocked, like, why? That's slower than everything we predicted. That's slower than our models say. That's slower than like our charts say. And, if you were to ask, any coach who has some knowledge of East African training and has watched them shuffle around and watch them circle around grass fields at meets even.
Yes, poli.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, that, and you see that, and you respect that.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. I try to get American westernized athletes to be like, hey, guys, poli, chill. out, please. Like, it has been a 1.5 year battle to get Tara Walling to run her easy runs at slower than 8-minute pace. Like, just trust me. Just trust me. Just slow, easy days. Less. I can't do it. I can't. Just do it. And finally, thank the Lord, she's converted. But it's yes. It's that coach's wisdom. It's that athlete's wisdom. It's like, this feels good. This feels right.
Right.
This is what I need.
It's that understanding that, hey, I worked really hard and I feel tired, so I'm going to keep it easy and get what I need to get into to recover. And I think a lot of times in the Western world, what we've done is like almost like convinced ourselves to block out all of the feedback that we're receiving. So anything that tells us like, oh, I'm tired, we just tell ourselves, oh, ignore that, push through. Or, oh, I need this pace. Oh, ignore that, I'm supposed to run at this pace or this heart rate, so push through. And we've trained out that ability to pay attention to our internal feedback and listen to what our body is saying, because we have more faith in the data or the numbers or the conversion chart that tells us what pace to run on our easy tempo, interval days than we do in our internal body.
That fits with the, industrial model of, you show up at this time and you go through the day and then you get off work at this time. The whistle blows, you start, the whistle blows again, you finish. And there's no, that guarantees a high volume of quote unquote believed productivity. But we are starting to understand, and there's getting a body of research to also support people's experiential evidence, that shorter, more compact blocks of work, 4 hours, 2 hours, yield higher productivity than an 8-hour, workday. So if you're just very productive and succinct for that period of time, that makes sense. Like everything else that is about the rhythm of our life, like you don't eat all day long. You have, enough of nourishment, and then you're nourished and your body processes it for a couple hours. You don't sleep all night. You sleep in chunks of time. You go in and out of REM sleep. There's a pulse, right? And so the idea that we can override these internal mechanisms that have been evolving for millions of years is hubris. And I think sometimes you have to have enough confidence as a coach to say, well, look, we had this plan today. I mean, I do this so often now. It's ridiculous. Like, I'll have a workout or a session planned. I'll watch someone, in the warm up and their activation and get that feedback from them too, ask them how they're doing. And it's just like, oh, you're not ready to work out today. Go home. Like, oh, but no, you don't. Like, you're not going to get anything out of the session today. And that goes back to having the experience and the confidence in experience without, a right or wrong judgment, just to witness and notice what is in front of you, just to see clearly and say, this person's not ready to do this thing that was planned today. And that's okay. But your PowerPoint says they should be. But you know what? It's very, very difficult to get such a fragile creature as is a human being to repeat these enormous feats of strength over and over and over again. And it's people wonder why NBA players kind of like mail it in during the regular season now, because the playoffs are so damn competitive and it's so intense. They're essentially readying their body for the whole season for the playoffs. And same deal too, like why people, the high elite pros in the marathon don't necessarily race as much as they did in the past, because now for a male to be competitive, you have to run 207 to 205. Back in the days of Frank Shorter and Bill Rogers, you just had to run 215. That 10 minutes difference in the marathon is very hard on the body. Yes, we can do it, but it takes a lot longer to recover from than if I'm running 215 3 or 4 times, in a year. It's like, say, Steve, remind me of the name, the Japanese marathoner, the working class guy. I mean, he's running fast, but not crazy fast.
Yeah.
But he's able to do it because the speed of play isn't quite as intense.
Yeah, it's funny. Just a quick plug in Peak Performance, our book. We talk about some of those things.
Our awesome title sponsor.
There we go.
Book, June 2nd?
June 4th? 6th.
June 6th. Okay, 6/6.
But I think what that point illustrates there is how much of our norms are social and cultural, And I just finished up a fabulous book called How Emotions Are Made. And it talks about how essentially emotions are constructed and are highly cultural and social too. In the sense that if you look at words for emotions in Russia or Scandinavia or wherever, they have words for emotions that don't exist in the US. They have variety and shades of gray on different emotions that we don't have here, and we don't have a corresponding feeling or understanding. And because they have that word, they have an entire construction of this feeling that we can't describe in the US. And if you sit back and you think about that for a little bit, it's crazy to think. But it has huge implications, right? If we look at fatigue, or we look at, preparation, anxiety for a race, a lot of that is socially constructed in the sense that, how you view races and anxiety and how you judge it and how you view fatigue, whether it's a good thing, a bad thing, a signal that you should simply change the workout or back off on the run versus something that, oh my gosh, I should push through and put my head down, or something negative that shows that I'm not ready. However you view it is going to create the reality of what it does, essentially, right? Our perceptions are our reality. And I think that understanding has gigantic implications, many of which you just talked about.
Well, feeling is knowing. When I feel something, I know it. That is the direct experience, right? And, there's been many studies that suggest people who speak multiple languages, 2, 3, 4, are very more inclined to be artistic because, like you just said, in different languages, there's different expressions to communicate different feelings. And how many poems and songs and books and articles and essays are written on love? It's one of those things. It's when you're in love, and you definitely know when you're not in love. But to articulate concisely what love is going to be a near impossibility in no matter what human language you have. Yes, you might be able to get very, very close to it. And this is this long philosophical discussion, that the Greeks have had about the different types of love and this and that. But all we can do with language is get close to the direct feeling and sensation. We can never exactly express it. And it's how even say in the Jewish tradition, the word for God, Yahweh, actually just a placeholder, because you can't really express in their view God, because any way we express it actually falls short of the magnificence that is this being and this entity, this idea. And when we understand that is a truth and a fundamental belief in a lot of worldviews and religions and languages, we then can transfer that to training. We then can transfer that to readiness and preparation coaching. And we can understand that the models that are in place that you see at the conferences, that you see in these nice, neat PowerPoints, that you see in these articles, they are close approximations. And that's all they are, approximations, because the thing that is the direct feeling and reality is what that person is experiencing in that moment. And not all that are experiencing can they verbally communicate to you. That's why you need to be super present at practice as a coach and watch on the difficult days what's going on, and not correct or give feedback on every rep, but just notice. And 9 times out of 10, if you notice long enough and bite your tongue a little bit, the athlete will magically iron out the things that aren't going well, because we as evolutionary beings have self-corrected to survive. Same deal here at practice. Now, when you're noticing trends that aren't going anywhere, then you pipe up, in my opinion, and you give that critical cue and say, hey, are you experiencing this? Are you feeling this? Are you aware of this? And they very well might be, but in a different context than you're noticing, or they might not be at all. And then you can have a conversation about the work. But that, to me, is a key separation and understanding between the knowledge you get in the classroom or sitting down and looking at a screen, which that approximation can only get you a little bit closer to being ready to have that deep wisdom that comes with experience.
Right. One of my favorite scientists, I think Richard Dawkins, once said that models are close enough to be right, but without all the messy details. And the point of that is that the only way we can create a model of that is to get rid of some of the messy details that confound it all. We have to make assumptions that allow us to work with it, because a model is essentially giving us something that is usable and allows us to conceptualize something, so that we can apply it to a broader scope than just saying copying this individual, word for word. So the model gets us almost there so that we can apply it. But what we miss out on those things is when people take that model and apply it to the individual without acknowledging those assumptions and those messy details. And I think that's where you get that experience versus PowerPoint approach, is whenever you see someone and you have that hour-long conversation with them or sit down for their presentation, realize what they're telling you is just an idealized model. Because as coaches, what do? Do we go up and say, hey, I'm going to present all the crappy things that went wrong and then we had to fix? Or am I going to go out and present my training program as it happened, but, we'll ignore this breakdown on the track on Monday in June, and we'll ignore like this when this athlete got sick or broke up with her boyfriend or girlfriend and how we had to adjust there. We're just going to present like the idealized version of how we got from point A to point B. And what people do is they make the mistake that path is a straight line path, and that if they just follow this presentation, they'll get there. And I think what John and I are trying to get across is that when you have skin in the game, when you get out into the trenches and start coaching, you notice all these things that have never been brought up in the textbook, that no one ever talks about in the presentations. Hopefully we're changing that a little bit, but that you never see. And those things are things that matter that you never could have imagined. And paying attention to them and realizing the importance they have is probably one of the key lessons for any developing coach.
And remember, the wabi-sabi can stay. That's okay. Like that imperfection is part of what makes that individual, that build up, that training plan, all that unique. That's fine. That's life. That's the beauty of it. So many times, an athlete might come back from, a physical therapist or some type of physio. And if they're a younger one, they'll come back and be like, oh, well, they told me like this glute isn't activating and firing at all. And this isn't doing this. And this is stuck and that's stuck. And I go, you ran like 2 for the 100 as a female, right? Like, I think things are working, but it's just not optimal right now. And the younger, physios and PTs like have this model. It's like, oh, well, this didn't turn on when I did this exact exercise. And I go, well, there's no way you can run too flat without your glutes turning on. You know what I mean?
But, I think the other point of that is we have this idea that like, oh, everything should be optimal. But it's never optimal.
No, never.
It's like people model all this stuff and they say, oh, like the optimal human being, if they have this category and this and this and this and this, they can run this. And it's like, well, that's great, but no one ever is going to be optimal. And you're optimal for what you do. Like, sorry, I'm going to get on my soapbox of PTs, and I love you guys, but sometimes,
Hey, I'm married to one, so go ahead.
There you go. But it's like we've had individuals who have compensated, who have developed patterns of movement, who have developed ways of running to make sure that their body can handle it. And sometimes that's going to be different from the idealized model, but they've figured it out and their body is pretty smart and they've had no problems. So let's keep rolling with it. And I think that this misnotion that, we need to have one exact way to run or one exact way to move really hurts athletes, because what it does is it creates this fragility where it's like, whenever I send athletes sometimes to the training room, it's like they come back and they say, like you just said, like my glute's not firing and, this turns on a little bit late and this has a slight internal rotation, and they come back with 4 or 5 different things that we need to correct. And I just watch them run, I don't know, a 4.0 mile, and they're on the top of the world in terms of their fitness and what they're doing. Now, I'm not saying to discount all of that information, but what I am saying is, like, take into consideration the person standing in front of you and their individual characteristics versus being on this search for something wrong. Because I think what happens is we're love to contribute, so we look for things that are wrong that we can fix. And if we tell the athlete that all this stuff is wrong, then we're creating this pattern in their mind that, oh my gosh, like I have to fix this and something is wrong with me.
Well, and presentation matters, right? How you present that information is key. Like if I want an athlete to, like, say, lose weight and you just say, oh, lose weight. Like, well, what does that mean? You can lose water weight, you can lose fat, you can lose muscle. So you can't just be like, oh, hey, lose weight. Lose fat. Well, how do I do that? I don't say that to someone, or drop 5 pounds. That's an easy, sloppy way to make someone very insecure. And when you see, a physio or a PT or anyone, of that kind of medical authority, and they say something similar like, okay, hey, you're not proficient in these 5 areas, all of a sudden that person leaves your office very insecure. So if I notice like an athlete might have some extra fat on them that they shouldn't have for whatever reason, I might be like, hey, is there anything in your diet that is a luxury or a snack or isn't good for you that you could give up? Anything at all? And they might be like, oh yeah, coach, I've been going to, McDonald's and getting the double Big Mac. I'm like, yeah, I should probably give that one up. So you have that conversation about, hey, and then it's like, is getting better and faster more important to you in the next 4 months or 4 weeks? I'm like, yeah, it is. Well, if you want to do that, I would suggest giving up those things that you're consuming that might not be the most healthy or the most nourishing that you could live without, if we're aligned. And so that's a much better dialogue to have than say lose 5 pounds, even though, the result is exactly the aim of the result is exactly the same deal here, right? If it's an aligned communication between the coach and the athlete and the physio and the sports scientist or the biomechanist or what have you, then everyone can help craft a strategy to get that person to where we all want them to see, which is at their best. And sometimes their best is going to be, like I said, there's going to be a wabi-sabi. There's going to be asymmetry. That's okay. I have never met anyone that's entirely symmetrical. Yes, we live in a Western culture that champions symmetry, and the most beautiful people are the people who have the most symmetrical faces. That's fine. Okay. But I've seen people who have ran very, very fast, very compellingly, in spite of their glutes not firing, in spite of one leg being longer than the other, in spite of some excessive pronation on the right leg versus the left leg. I've seen this happen so many times. So, it's not that I'm totally discounting that. It's okay. Is it a liability, and is it something that you need to track and maybe take steps towards correcting and strengthening or bettering so it doesn't become a liability that puts them on the sidelines in the future? Yes. What's the strategy? So there, I think, again, how you transfer that knowledge or that information or how you communicate to the athlete, that subtle, presentation and critiquing your presentation can have compounding interest on how it's received.
Yeah, 100%. How the message comes across is just as important as the actual message you're being sent. So I hate to cut us off, John, but I'm getting called to long jump duty. So
all right, the man, the master. I think, are you gonna, hopefully start coaching the deck here in 5-10 years?
Maybe if
you're just noticing, taking notes.
If this distance running thing doesn't work out, then
well, look, your mentor Telez coached everything.
He did. He coached it all. So trying to learn. But it also shows that we have skin in the game here. So thanks a lot for listening, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Again, looking at experience versus PowerPoint. And if I could sum it up really quickly, it's that, experience matters, and that models are great, they're useful, all that stuff, but don't forget that they leave out the messy details, and that you need to get your hands dirty and go in and coach. And
messy is good. Messy is good. But
Exactly.
You know what? Neat is nice. And if you want something really nice that is neat, get Steve's new book, Peak Performance, June 6th.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody.
All right, people. Love you. We're giving you what you want. We'll be back soon.